Hey everybody, welcome back to PhotoRec.tv. I'm Toby, and I want to talk about the fact that many of the newer mirrorless cameras are using cards other than SD. You've got Sony using CF Express A, Nikon uses XQD cards, Canon is using CF Express B. Now, the good news, all of these cards are faster and more robust than the SD cards they're replacing, and that's great because just yesterday, seriously, yesterday I had 2 SD cards physically fail on me. However, these newer style cards are a good bit more expensive, and if you just blew your budget on an expensive mirrorless camera, you might be looking for ways to save. Well, I've got 3 CF Express A cards on the table here, one of which is larger and significantly cheaper than the other 2. But is it a good value? I also have a $35 card reader and a $120 card reader. Which do you think is faster? Is it a trick question? Now, before we get to the data, I just want to say, PSA. If you've got a camera with dual card slots and one of the slots only accepts a newer style card and you've been too cheap to buy that newer type of card and just shooting on your little old SD in one lonely slot, come here. How silly are you going to feel when something happens and you lose all of your images because you spent a bunch of money on a camera but then wouldn't spend just a little bit on a nice additional card? And I know you're out there because I talk to you. I talk to you on workshops, you email me. Please, from one concerned human being to another, if you have a camera that has 2 card slots, you need to be using both card slots. Stuff happens. Accidents happen. I see it all the time, and it's always very sad. Okay, you don't even need to buy multiple cards. Just buy one. Put it in there and basically use it as a continuous backup. Not only is this going to give you a backup, but very likely can make a difference in how many photos you can shoot before you see some buffer slowdowns and possibly let you shoot on higher quality video settings. Now, one of the reasons I hear that people don't want to buy the new style of cards, besides just spending the money, is they also don't want to spend money on a new style of card reader. You don't have to. Your camera is a card reader. You can download directly from your camera, which brings me to an additional point and an additional PSA. With many of these modern mirrorless cameras, I find it very convenient to download directly from the camera to the computer. At the end of each day, I plug my camera into my computer and download those images directly into Lightroom. When the import finishes, I turn the camera off, but leave it connected, and it starts to charge. Now, this isn't true of all current mirrorless cameras, but many of them will start to charge just being connected to your computer. I really like this method because, one, it makes it that much less likely that I'm going to leave the house without a memory card in the camera, which embarrassingly has happened to me. And 2, as I said at the opening of this, all I have to do to start charging the camera is remember to turn it off after import. It's just going to start charging just like that. On many of the workshops I travel on now, I rarely bring a battery charger. I just charge in camera. To flesh this idea out a little bit more, just to share with you, I continue shooting on cards until they are full. On many trips, I can get through several days or maybe even a week of shooting on these larger 160 or 180 gigabyte cards. This gives me really nice peace of mind. I know some of you out there are saying, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket, but here's how I work. Every day I download those images to the computer, and that gives me nice peace of mind because all previous day's photos are backed up to this computer. That's either left at home or back in the hotel room or on the ship, depending on the workshop. And I have with me in the camera all the photos I've shot so far. Once the cards fill up, then they go in this little think tank pixel rocket. I put them in upside down, and I know where this is, and of course I know where my camera is at all times, so those images are all with me, plus a backup back at the hotel room. It works for me. One more important bit of info, not all USB-C cords are the same. So if you have a newer computer that only has USB-C ports and you're looking around for a cord with USB-C at both ends and you grab something like this nice little white Android one, its data transfer is ridiculously slow. So please make sure you use the one that came with your camera or spend 15 bucks to buy something like this. It's very, very affordable, and it's going to support much faster speeds. Also, if you are using a hub, because you have multiple things connected, it's very common, make sure it's not an older, slower one. So often I see that as a bottleneck between computers and camera, or computers and hard drive. I've got a short article linked right down below with some recommendations. Again, very affordable, most of them less than 30 bucks. All right, we have all of that out of the way. As I said in the opening, 3 CF Express A cards here on the table with me, and while I can't say for sure, I do think my experience with each of these brands is transferable to the other versions made by these brands. For instance, CF Express A and B and XQD, if the brands make them. Now, the first card I want to talk about is the Exascend 180 gigabyte card. It's actually a brand I'd never heard of until they contacted me late last year and said, hey, will you review this card? It is slightly larger in capacity and currently $100 cheaper than the Sony card. I also have with me here a 160 gigabyte ProGrade card that I purchased myself in January of 2022, just to give you an idea of how long I've been using these cards, and then the 160 gigabyte Sony Tough card that I purchased in March of 2001 along with the Sony A1. Now, Exascend sent me this card to review in early January of 2023, and it has lived in my camera since then. I appreciate that they allowed me to make a very long-term video review because with cards, you want to fully test them. I have zero complaints. It has worked flawlessly and seems on par with the other 2 more expensive cards. But for the purpose of this video, I did do some careful testing, and once we dig into the numbers, there are differences. I used Blackmagic's disk speed test to evaluate each card, and I ran this test at least 3 times for each card, averaging out the results. I also used this as an opportunity to test the $35 Sabrent card reader, the affordable one, versus the expensive Sony card reader, and compare those speeds against importing directly from the camera, my favorite method, which, as you see, is a lot slower. However, the pros I listed out prior, I'm still going to use that method most of the time. Overall, the data can be summarized in the following. First, this cheaper Sabrent card reader offers the fastest speeds. It wasn't a huge difference, but just the fact that $35 outperforms $120, well, it's nice when that happens. Now, there are a few more pros and cons to both of these card readers. I'll list those briefly at the end of this video. Let's get on to talking about the cards. The Exascend card that is 33% cheaper than the Sony card turns out to be about 23% slower on write speeds, 5% slower on read speeds. The ProGrade card, which is just a little cheaper than the Sony, is very close in performance and actually in some cases beats it. Now, interestingly, the camera write speed bottleneck, or read speed bottleneck, does something weird that actually allows the Exascend to outperform the other cards when downloading directly from the camera, though it's not by any huge margin, but this does explain why I felt the card was just as fast, if not faster, since I've only been using that to import. Blackmagic, though, doesn't give us real-world results. That's just a speed test, and I wanted to see what it was like to actually use these cards. So the first thing I did was import 571 large raw photos from each card using the Sabrent card reader. The Sony card finished that import in 47 seconds. The ProGrade took 58 seconds, and interestingly, the Exascend took 56 seconds. It was faster than the ProGrade. I'm not sure how to explain those results, but I ran it multiple times and got similar results. Now, overall, this difference as a percentage between all 3 cards is single digits, but that was with 571 images. If you are importing 2,000, you're gonna, of course, see a larger or bigger time difference. Next, I tested the burst speed. Setting the Sony A1 camera to H+ and shooting compressed RAWs gives me 30 frames per second. And I think the easiest way to look at these results is with the waveforms that I captured of the shutter firing. Each peak is an actual shutter actuation. Now, running out through here, you can see that there is a lot of similarity all the way out until about 5 seconds. That's when you start to see a tiny bit of hesitation with the Sony card. You move down to the Exascend card, you can see that there's actually a noticeable little gap there. And again, this gap, look at that time difference, 5 5:08 seconds to 5:12, 5:13 seconds, but then you can see that continual hesitation afterwards. The ProGrade card has a short hesitation there, then a little bit of a larger one, and similar to the other two cards, has kind of continual hesitations as it moves on out and on and on. And you can see at a point, at about 7.5 seconds, the Exascend really does start to struggle and does this kind of statico firing. Shooting at the more reasonable 20 frames per second and lossless compressed large RAW, which that's actually larger files, the ProGrade manages to do a very nice job for a little bit longer than the others. The Exascend starts to show some slight hesitation right at about the same time, and the Sony actually starts that hesitation a little bit prior. Let's take a moment to listen to the Exascend card out there at the hesitation point. Now, just a note that in my real-world use with the Sony A1 since March of 2021, I have had slowdowns from filling the buffer a couple of times. So you could take that as, one, I'm maybe not the best person to test these cards, or two, you are going to rarely see significant differences between these cards. Something to keep in mind. I also recorded video at the highest bit rates of 8K and 4K, had no issues with either card, no heat issues either. Whenever you're buying from a less established brand, there is some concern about support. If you have an issue with a card, are you going to be able to get somebody on the other end of an email or phone call to help you? Based on my research, which is basically reading reviews of all of the different Exascend products, they have responded well when they needed to, so that's some nice peace of mind. So I'm going to repeat. This Exascend card is 33% cheaper than Sony. It offers 13% more capacity, but is about 23% slower on write speed, 5% on read speeds, and as you saw in real-world testing, there are some noticeable differences, but really, I think many of us aren't going to. But you need to decide, is it worth the savings? If you're not maxing out the camera's buffer often, I do think those savings and additional space is nice. If you're worried about a newer company and their track record not being established yet, ProGrade is a great company. The savings are much smaller, but they are an established brand, and you should have some peace of mind buying from them. Or you want to only put Sony cards in your Sony camera, you can do that too. Oh, and the little card reader battle between the Sabrent, $35, beating out the Sony, $120. Well, the Sony is also an SD card reader, and it does come with two different USB-C cords to use. I should say one's USB-C to A, one's USB-C to C. So that is a benefit of it, and it's a really nice construction. The Sabrent has this fixed USB-C cord, and I always wonder a little bit about the durability of the attachment point here. It's nicely reinforced and it seems quite robust, but as I said, I wonder about it a little bit. All right, that's it. I'm done. If you've got any comments, questions, thoughts, leave those right down below this video. I really appreciate it. I've got links to everything I've talked about, and don't forget to hit that thumbs up button because that really does help the algorithm. Don't forget to subscribe, and that's my hand. You can buy my post-processing ebook for whatever money you want to spend on it. That's pay what you want right now. That's linked right down below as well. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.